Welcome to Voluble Minds, reflections on and abbreviated readings of famous philosophical dialogues. I'm Colin Wulff, Assistant Director of Religious Education at the Fourth Universalist Society in New York City. If you would like to skip the introductory segment on today's philosopher and dialogue and go straight to the reading, the timestamp posted in the video description will help you to do that. Thank you for joining us. For the next and last episode in our David Hume unit, we have a series of excerpts from his dialogues concerning natural religion, the first part of which will actually be a monologue, the second a trialogue. This is one of the 2 or 3 works in our series least covered by our sample, proportional to its uncut version, so I will attempt to offer a more thorough, to use Kant's term, prolegomenon than usual in this pre-dialogue segment. Fair warning, feel free to skip. David Hume marks the spot where the prevailing sensibility of our dialogues really starts to turn more towards a naturalistic or skeptical worldview. We saw a bit of this with Hobbes, and as we've said before, that word skeptical can be a bit hard to pin down as these philosophers use it. As you listen to these excerpts, consider how, like with our last selection, Hume tries with mixed results to keep a balance between that avoidance of supernatural dogma and a retention of rigorous questioning of the reliability of human judgment, which nonetheless is all we really have to go on. He sends us a strong message that repeated events and the appearance of causality, of course, moves us to expect similar results under similar conditions, and what else can we do? But in absolute terms, we are limited in our ability to fully verify even the most reliable of predictions, like the sun's rising tomorrow. So when giving into purely speculative matters, like the nature of a possible creator, we should be very careful. English philosopher Bertrand Russell acknowledges the fundamental value of admitting to this limitation of human judgment and pattern recognition, writing in his 1912 book, The Problems of Philosophy, that coherence can be at most a criterion of truth, not a sufficient feature of it. But Russell attempts to reconcile this fact with the possibility of a more universal understanding, writing in the same book, our intuitive knowledge, which is the source of all our other knowledge of truths, is of 2 sorts. Pure empirical knowledge, which tells us of the existence and some of the properties of particular things with which we are acquainted, and pure a priori knowledge, which gives us connections between universals and enables us to draw inferences from the particular facts given in empirical knowledge. Our derivative knowledge always depends upon some pure a priori knowledge, and usually also depends upon some pure empirical knowledge. This essential relationship between rational thought and observed experience, which we first mentioned in our Galileo introduction, is important to keep in mind even as we associate philosophers like Hume, Berkeley, Locke, Leibniz, and Descartes with one tradition or the other. Really, none of them kept reason and experience entirely separate in their philosophical procedures because it's impossible to do so. The first selection we'll see is an address from one Pamphilus to Hermippus. The dialogues concerning natural religion are narrated by Pamphilus, having observed them, and he writes of them in this letter to Hermippus. I've kept this introduction before the actual conversation begins because it serves as such a great reflection of the art of the dialogue in general, as well as its historical function in philosophy, its values and frustrations. I was almost tempted to open the whole series with it, but I kept to my chronology, and instead it will serve as a sort of final stretch reflection on the form. I will be reading Pamphilus in that. Then we will move on to what in our edit is a trialogue concerning the degrees of certainty achievable by humans in regarding the natural world and God. Hume was partly inspired to write these dialogues concerning natural religion by Cicero's dialogue De Natura Deorum, written in 45 BCE, in which skepticism, stoicism, and Epicureanism are contested by 3 philosophers advocating their respective schools, and it's narrated by Cicero. In Hume's dialogues, it's Cleanthes, Demea, and Philo who debate human competency to determine the existence and properties of a deity. Cleanthes believes proofs of God's existence can be found empirically in the world. For Cleanthes, teleological explanations, or arguments of purposed design, are sufficient to connect human perception of nature to its author. This argument is better known today as intelligent design. Cleanthes poses a serious schoolyard challenge to his more skeptical counterpart, daring him to test his low opinion of human perception by self-defenestration. Demea takes a cosmological approach, preferring to apply deductive or a priori reasoning to God's existence rather than inductive reasoning from observation and experience. Demea sees a path to God through grappling with questions of contingency and infinitude. He dislikes Cleanthes' tendency to compare God's design to human creations, thinking it too anthropomorphic, given that we are dealing with an unimaginatively supreme being. His fideism, or faith alone, still begs the question of why even his a priori reason should suffice, though. Enter Philo, who is generally considered Hume's representative in this dialogue. While some say craftily steering clear of pure atheism, he expresses his dissatisfaction with the arguments put forth by both Cleanthes and Demea, declaring that humans have no basis, either through reason or empiricism, to arrive at belief in any god, however admirable the idea of God may be. However, as we mentioned in the previous episode, this was a double-edged out, for it implicitly recommended faith in knowing God. In a portion we won't be including towards the end, Philo says, "The only persons entitled to God's compassion and indulgence would be the philosophical skeptics, who, from a natural diffidence of their own capacity, suspend or endeavor to suspend all judgment with regard to such sublime and such extraordinary subjects." In this episode, we will be offering a prize-free in-dialogue round of Spot the Bacon. Keep alert for a passing shout out to Lord Bacon, Francis Bacon, English philosopher and statesman, advisor to Elizabeth I. Bacon is sometimes called the father of the scientific method for his advocacy of inductive empirical reasoning. He attempted to answer and improve on Aristotle's system of logic with his own work Novum Organum. In it, Bacon lays out a way to formalize our approach to discovery and interpretation that puts a check on speculation, except insofar as it helps us to incorporate facts already encountered or to better pursue them. It is also known for laying out certain idola mentis, or idols of the mind, which Bacon thought humankind would have to dispense with in order to truly master scientific inquiry. This includes our personal biases of taste, confirmation, orderly explanation, linguistic precision, and community pressures. Touching more poetic dialogues than those of our series, conspiracy theories regarding Bacon's authorship of Shakespeare's plays do not appear to meet a very Baconian standard of evidence. It makes sense, though, that he would show up in this Hume dialogue, which is titled after natural religion, but is really asking, what clues as to nature's origin and workings are we capable of making sense of from within nature itself? How do we make sense of them? And to what do they really point? These dialogues don't lend themselves quite as nicely to this format because, unlike the Platonic dialogues, they're written in the form of a narrative letter and have more in the way of slow, turn-based speech-making than flurried dialectical tennis. So it won't contrast quite as clearly with the introductory segments. But luckily, my superb guest readers will step in to humanize Hume. So today I am joined by my two friends and fellow actors, Kathleen Denecke and Emily Song Tyler, reading Cleanthes and Demea, respectively, to my Philo. Kathleen is a talented poet, in addition to being an experienced classical actor, and Emily is a gifted musical theater performer, working with several regional companies, as well as traveling the world with the touring production of Nickelodeon's Paw Patrol. You've probably also seen her working background in most of your favorite TV shows. The three of us met bringing free Shakespeare to the 5 boroughs of New York City, and now we'll debate human reason, nature's origins, and the qualities of God. Hume's dialogues concerning natural religion are in the public domain. Please enjoy these selections, first an address from Pamphilus to Hermippus, and then the argument. It has been remarked, my Hermippus, that though the ancient philosophers conveyed most of their instruction in the form of dialogue, this method of composition has been little practiced in later ages, and has seldom succeeded in the hands of those who have attempted it. Accurate and regular argument, indeed, such as is now expected of philosophical inquirers, naturally throws a man into the methodical and didactic manner where he can immediately, without preparation, explain the point at which he aims, and thence proceed without interruption to deduce the proofs on which it is established. To deliver a system in conversation scarcely appears natural, and while the dialogue writer desires, by departing from the direct style of composition, to give a freer air to his performance and avoid the appearance of author and reader, he is apt to run into a worse inconvenience and convey the image of pedagogue and pupil. Or, if he carries on the dispute in the natural spirit of good company by throwing in a variety of topics and preserving a proper balance among the speakers, He often loses so much time in preparations and transitions that the reader will scarcely think himself compensated by all the graces of dialogue for the order, brevity, and precision which are sacrificed to them. There are some subjects, however, to which dialogue writing is peculiarly adapted and where it is still preferable to the direct and simple method of composition. Any point of doctrine which is so obvious that it scarcely admits of dispute, but at the same time so important that it cannot be too often inculcated, seems to require some such method of handling it, where the novelty of the manner may compensate the triteness of the subject, where the vivacity of conversation may enforce the precept, and where the variety of lights presented by various personages and characters may appear neither tedious nor redundant. Any question of philosophy, on the other hand, which is so obscure and uncertain that human reason can reach no fixed determination with regard to it, if it should be treated at all, seems to lead us naturally into the style of dialogue and conversation. Reasonable men may be allowed to differ where no one can reasonably be positive. Opposite sentiments, even without any decision, afford an agreeable amusement. And if the subject be curious and interesting, the book carries us, in a manner, into company and unites the two greatest and purest pleasures of human life, study and society. Happily, these circumstances are all to be found in the subject of natural religion.
I shall communicate to you a maxim which I have observed with regard to my own children, that I may learn how far it agrees with your practice. The method I follow in their education is founded on the saying of an ancient, that students of philosophy ought first to learn logics, then ethics, next physics, last of all, nature of the gods. This science of natural theology, according to him, being the most profound and abstruse of any, required the maturest judgment in its students, and none but a mind enriched with all the other sciences can safely be entrusted with it.
Are you so late in teaching your children the principles of religion? Is there no danger of their neglecting or rejecting altogether those opinions of which they have heard so little during the course of their education?
It is only as a science subjected to human reasoning and disputation that I postpone the study of natural theology. To season their minds with an early piety is my chief care, and by continual precept and instruction, and I hope too, by example, I imprint deeply in their tender minds an habitual reverence for all the principles of religion. While they pass through every other science, I still remark the uncertainty of each part, the eternal disputations of men, the obscurity of all philosophy, and the strange, ridiculous conclusions which some of the greatest geniuses have derived from the principles of mere human reason. Having thus tamed their minds to a proper submission and self diffidence, I have no longer any scruple of opening to them the greatest mysteries of religion, to apprehend any danger from that assuming arrogance of philosophy, which may lead them to reject the most established doctrines and opinions.
Your precaution of seasoning your children's minds early with piety is certainly very reasonable, and no more than is requisite in this profane and irreligious age. But what I chiefly admire in your plan of education is your method of drawing advantage from the very principles of philosophy and learning which, by inspiring pride and self sufficiency, have commonly, in all ages, been found so destructive to the principles of religion. The vulgar, indeed, we may remark, who are unacquainted with science and profound inquiry, observing the endless disputes of the learned, have commonly a thorough contempt for philosophy, and rivet themselves the faster by that means to the great points of theology which have been taught them. Those who enter a little into study and inquiry, finding many appearances of evidence in doctrines the newest and most extraordinary, think nothing too difficult for human reason, and presumptuously, breaking through all fences, profane the inmost sanctuaries of the temple. Let us become thoroughly sensible of the weakness, blindness, and narrow limits of human reason. Let us duly consider its uncertainty and endless contrarieties, even in subjects of common life and practice. Let the errors and deceits of our very senses be set before us, the insuperable difficulties which attend first principles in all systems.
You propose then, Philo, to erect religious faith on philosophical skepticism, And you think that if certainty or evidence be expelled from every other subject of inquiry, it will all retire to these theological doctrines and there acquire a superior force and authority. Whether your skepticism be as absolute and sincere as you pretend, we shall learn by and by when the company breaks up. We shall then see whether you go out the door or the window, and whether you really doubt if your body has gravity or can be injured by its fall, according to popular opinion derived from our fallacious senses and more fallacious experience.
It seems certain that, though a man in a flush of humor, after intense reflection on the many contradictions and imperfections of human reason, may entirely renounce all belief and opinion, it is impossible for him to persevere in this total skepticism, or make it appear in his conduct for more than a few hours. External objects press in upon him, passions solicit him, his philosophical melancholy dissipates, and even the utmost violence upon his own temper will not be able during any time to preserve the poor appearance of skepticism.
After the union of philosophy with the popular religion, upon the first establishment of Christianity, nothing was more usual among all religious teachers than declamations against reason, against the senses, against every principle derived merely from human research and inquiry. All the topics of the ancient academics were adopted by the fathers and thence propagated for several ages in every school and pulpit throughout Christendom. The reformers embraced the same principles of reasoning, or rather declamations, and all panegyrics on the excellence of faith were sure to be interlarded with some severe strokes of satire against natural reason. Locke seems to have been the first Christian who ventured openly to assert that faith was nothing but a species of reason, that religion was only a branch of philosophy, and that a chain of arguments similar to that which established any truth in morals, politics, or physics was always employed in discovering all the principles of theology, natural and revealed. And now it is in a manner avowed by all pretenders to reasoning and philosophy that atheist and skeptic are almost synonymous. And as it is certain that no man is in earnest when he professes the latter principle, I would fain hope that there are as few who seriously maintain the former.
Do you remember the excellent saying of Lord Bacon on this head?
That a little philosophy makes a man an atheist, a great deal converts him to religion.
That is a very judicious remark, but what I have in my eye is another passage where, having mentioned David's fool, who said, "In his heart there is no God," this great philosopher observes that the atheists nowadays have a double share of folly. For they are not contented to say, "In their hearts there is no God," but they also utter that impiety with their lips, and are thereby guilty of multiplied indiscretion and imprudence. Such people, though they were ever so much in earnest, cannot, methinks, be very formidable. But though you should rank me in this class of fools, it appears to me that there are strong symptoms of priestcraft in the whole progress of this affair. During the ignorant ages, such as those which followed the dissolution of the ancient schools, the priests perceived that atheism, deism, or heresy of any kind could only proceed from the presumptuous questioning of received opinions, and from a belief that human reason was equal to everything. But at present, when the influence of education is much diminished, and men from a more open commerce of the world have learned to compare the popular principles of different nations and ages, our sagacious divines have changed their whole system of philosophy. If we distrust human reason, we have now no other principle to lead us into religion. Thus, skeptics in one age, dogmatists in another, whichever system best suits the purpose of these reverend gentlemen in giving them an ascendant over mankind, they are sure to make it their favorite principle and established tenet.
It is very natural for men to embrace those principles by which they can best defend their doctrines, nor need we have any recourse to priestcraft to account for so reasonable expedient. And surely nothing can afford a stronger presumption that any set of principles are true and ought to be embraced than to observe that they tend to the confirmation of religion and serve to confound the cavils of atheists, libertines, and free thinkers of all denominations. Look around the world. Contemplate the whole and every part of it. You will find it to be nothing but one great machine, subdivided into an infinite number of lesser machines, which again admit of subdivisions to a degree beyond what human senses and faculties can trace and explain. All these various machines, and even their most minute parts, are adjusted to each other with an accuracy which ravishes into admiration all men who have ever contemplated them. The curious adapting of means to ends throughout all nature resembles exactly, though it much exceeds, the productions of human contrivance, of human design, thought, wisdom, and intelligence. Since therefore the effects resemble each other, we are led to infer, by all the rules of analogy, that the causes also resemble, and that the author of nature is somewhat similar to the mind of man, though possessed of much larger faculties proportioned to the grandeur of the work which he has executed. By this argument a posteriori, and by this argument alone, do we prove at once the existence of a deity and his similarity to human mind and intelligence.
I shall be so free, Cleanthes, as to tell you that from the beginning I could not approve of your conclusion concerning the similarity of the deity to men. Still less can I approve of the mediums by which you endeavor to establish it. What? No demonstration of the being of God? No abstract arguments? No proofs a priori? Are these which have hitherto been so much insisted by philosophers all fallacy, all sophism? Can we reach no farther in the subject than experience and probability?
What I chiefly scruple in this subject is not so much that all religious arguments are by Cleanthes reduced to experience, as that they appear not to be even the most certain and irrefragable of that inferior kind. The analogical reasoning is much weaker when we infer the circulation of the sap in vegetables from our experience that the blood circulates in animals, and those who hastily followed that imperfect analogy are found, by more accurate experiments, to have been mistaken.
I should be deservedly blamed and detested did I allow that the proofs of a deity amounted to no more than a guess or conjecture. But is the whole adjustment of means to ends in a house and in the universe so slight a resemblance? The economy of final causes, the order, proportion, and arrangement of every part?
Good God, where are we? Zealous defenders of religion allow that the proofs of a deity fall short of perfect evidence. And you, Philo, on whose assistance I depended in proving the adorable mysteriousness of the divine nature, do you assent to all these extravagant opinions of Cleanthes?
Were a man to abstract from everything which he knows or has seen, he would be altogether incapable, merely from his own ideas, to determine what kind of scene the universe must be, or to give the preference to one state or situation of things above another. For as nothing which he clearly conceives could be esteemed impossible or implying a contradiction, every chimera of his fancy would be upon an equal footing, nor could he assign just reason why he adheres to one idea or system and rejects the others, which are equally possible. Again, after he opens his eyes and contemplates the world as it really is, it would be impossible for him at first to assign the cause of any one event, much less the whole of things or of the universe. According to this method of reasoning, Demea, it follows, and is indeed tacitly allowed by Cleanthes, that order, arrangement, or the adjustment of final causes is not of itself any proof of design, but only so far as it has been experienced to proceed from that principle. Welcome to the post dialogue reflection on Hume's dialogues concerning natural religion. Some of the names of the characters you just encountered may sound familiar, and so I offer this disambiguation. There is no necessary connection to those with whom they share their names, from what I can tell at least, but in some cases it offers a nice grace note or two. Demea does appear to be Hume's creation, while Cleanthes and Philo share their names with historical figures, though again, these figures are not super neatly comparable to their corresponding speakers in the dialogue. Cleanthes was a Stoic philosopher in the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE, pupil to the founder of Stoicism, Zeno of Citium, and in turn teacher to one of its most significant contributors, Chrysippus. Philo of Alexandria, who lived in the 1st century BCE, was a Jewish philosopher living in a Hellenized Egypt under Roman rule. He had Stoical leanings and is best known for applying Greek philosophical ideas to the Torah. Before we wrap up our Hume unit, I want to leave you with some questions to consider and maybe with which to start dialogues on your own time. Hume's dialogue goes on for another 10 lengthy sections after where we left it. If you'd like to read it or the inquiry in their entirety, mull over these as you go. Does existence itself contain its own explanations? And if so, does it point to a deity, a creator? Can human experience and analogy possibly be sufficient to describe such a deity or creator? Is observation superior to reason, and how fruitful is it to separate the two? If either can be trusted, shall not human experience and reason also be adequate to deny the possibility of a deity? Or should human reason be done away with entirely on the argument that faith arrived at through reason is not truly faith? Is Philo right that the role of reason is cynically stressed and de-stressed by clerical leaders as it suits or impedes their systems of control? If we are to dispense with human reason entirely, by what faculties should we even begin to recognize those wonders which, by countenancing of a deity, must proceed from God? Is not the decision to commit to faith in itself a choice made by human judgment, however rationally or impulsively advised? To follow this debate around every turn and to every cranny, I really do recommend reading the dialogues in full. Thank you for joining us for this post-dialogue section, and this concludes our David Hume unit.